Listen carefully. This is not a coincidence, and it is not a motivational message designed to lift you temporarily and leave you unchanged. Something shifted recently, quietly, subtly, without ceremony or applause. And the reason certain doors did not open, the reason certain conversations suddenly stopped mid-sentence, the reason certain people faded from your life without explanation is not because you failed, hesitated, or were overlooked. It is because you crossed an internal threshold that cannot be reversed. Chosen one, you didn't block them, you didn't fight back, you didn't defend yourself or explain your intentions. You simply withdrew your energy, and that single act triggered a spiritual protection sequence that does not announce itself loudly but restructures everything silently. When your energy pulled inward, the universe responded by sealing off access points that were draining, distracting, or misaligned with what you're becoming. Right now, you may feel alone, unseen, or as if the world suddenly went quiet around you, but hear this clearly and without distortion. Silence is not abandonment. Silence is containment. It is the space where something precise is being prepared, the pause before a recalibration completes. When noise leaves your life, it is because you no longer require chaos to define your direction. This phase removes witnesses because growth at this level cannot be negotiated or influenced. What you are entering does not need validation, it needs stability. That is why familiar energy fell away. That is why explanations were no longer requested. That is why resistance stopped showing up altogether. You are no longer in a phase where lessons come through conflict. Now they come through clarity. Before we go further, do something intentional and grounded in awareness. Comment, "I am chosen" below, not as a performance but as alignment, a signal that your nervous system is ready to hold what is arriving. Like this video to seal the message into action, not habit. Subscribe, because what's unfolding now is not a moment, it is a sequence, and sequences require continuity. Now take a breath, slow and deliberate, because what follows is not stimulation but recognition. The quiet you're experiencing is not emptiness, it's insulation. The universe is limiting interference while your internal structure strengthens. This is where discernment sharpens, where intuition recalibrates, where you stop reacting and start moving with precision. Those who could only meet you at your old frequency cannot follow you here, and they don't need closure because the separation was energetic, not personal. You are being trained to operate without noise, without reassurance, without approval, because what comes next will require composure, not explanation. Stay steady, stay inward. What has gone silent was never meant to come with you, and what is approaching will recognize you without introduction. Point 1. Why the loneliness appeared suddenly and without warning. Chosen one, the loneliness you are feeling did not arrive gradually. It came suddenly because it was not built by circumstances. It was initiated by alignment, a quiet but decisive recalibration that shifted your entire inner landscape at once. One moment, your life appeared full. Conversations looping endlessly, obligations pulling at your attention, messages demanding replies, expectations leaning on your emotional bandwidth. And the next moment, silence, fewer notifications, fewer invitations, fewer people reaching for your energy. The mind rushes to label this silence as loss, as rejection, as something gone wrong, but the soul recognizes it correctly as separation, not punishment, but precision. What you are experiencing is not social isolation, it is energetic withdrawal, the natural consequence of no longer resonating with noise that once felt familiar. When you stopped explaining yourself, something subtle but irreversible occurred. When you stopped chasing clarity from people who survived on confusion, a signal was released into the unseen architecture of your life. And that signal said, I no longer require external validation to remain whole. Loneliness begins when the nervous system realizes it no longer has to stay hyper-vigilant, no longer has to brace for emotional turbulence, or manage other people's instability. Your body is learning a new rhythm, adjusting to peace, and peace can feel empty at first when chaos has been normalized for years. This is why the loneliness feels sharp but clean, why it carries no drama, no betrayal, no active conflict, only space. And space is not absence. Space is where protection begins. The divine does not always shield you by surrounding you with people. It often shields you by removing unnecessary access, by closing doors quietly so you can finally hear yourself think. This phase arrives when you are no longer meant to learn through friction but through refinement, when growth no longer needs resistance to sharpen it. You're not being abandoned. You're being narrowed. The path feels lonely because it is becoming exact, and only what truly aligns can walk it with you. Point 2. The unconscious decision that activated protection. You did something recently that you did not celebrate, announce, or even fully understand at the time, but it marked a turning point that only becomes clear in hindsight. You chose not to react when a reaction was expected. You chose not to defend yourself when justification felt almost automatic. You chose not to prove your goodness, your intentions, or your loyalty to people who had already decided how they would perceive you. That single decision disrupted a pattern that had existed quietly around you for a long time, a pattern that fed on your emotional presence more than your actual actions. Many negative situations are not sustained by malice alone. They survive through participation. They require your explanations, your anger, and your hope that clarity will eventually lead to fairness. When you stepped out of that loop, the structure had nothing left to stand on. In the spiritual realm, restraint is not weakness, it is authority. Silence is not avoidance, it is discernment. You were not retreating, you were reclaiming sovereignty over where your energy goes. You did not escape negativity by overpowering it or correcting it. You escaped it by becoming incompatible with it. That incompatibility is subtle but absolute. It changes how situations respond to you without you needing to intervene. That is why certain tensions dissolved instead of escalating. That is why conversations ended without resolution, yet they lost their grip over you. That is why some people stopped pressing, questioning, or provoking. Your energy was no longer supplying the emotional fuel those dynamics needed to survive. This is how divine protection often operates. It does not arrive loudly or dramatically. It does not always feel like relief in the moment. It works quietly, removing you from patterns that would have required pain to teach you the same lesson. You were not spared because you were passive. You were spared because you were ready. Point 3. Why certain people can observe you, but no longer access. You may have noticed something unsettling yet clarifying, a quiet shift that didn't announce itself but became undeniable once it settled in. Some people still know you exist. They still watch from a distance. They still remember versions of you that no longer apply. But they cannot reach you. Not in the way they once did. Their messages feel heavy before they are sent, as if the intention itself carries weight. Their presence feels intrusive before it becomes real, like your system senses misalignment before your mind needs proof. This is not arrogance, and it is not superiority. This is boundary activation at a spiritual level, where your body and awareness have learned to protect coherence. Access is no longer granted by history, obligation, or nostalgia. Access is a privilege that must align with your nervous system. Many connections only survived because you tolerated imbalance, because you absorbed emotional weight that was never yours to carry, and because you stayed quiet to keep the peace. When you stopped doing that, those connections lost their anchor. People who benefited from your empathy, patience, and silence often interpret boundaries as distance or rejection because they were never connected to your truth, only to your availability. But boundaries are not walls meant to punish. They are filters designed to preserve clarity. They allow resonance and block distortion. This is why your circle shrank without confrontation. This is why you did not feel compelled to explain yourself. Explanation is required only when guilt exists. You felt no guilt because the withdrawal was necessary, precise, and intelligent. You are not rejecting people out of bitterness. You are responding to an internal calibration that now prioritizes stability over familiarity, alignment over attachment, and peace over repetition. Point 4. The real purpose of the protection phase. This phase is not about keeping you safe forever. It is about teaching you how to remain safe without effort, without hypervigilance, and without constantly scanning the environment for threats. Protection phases are training grounds, quiet chambers where your nervous system is finally allowed to breathe. They show you what your life feels like when unnecessary chaos is absent, when drama is no longer mistaken for meaning. In this stillness, your perception of normal is recalibrated. You begin to realize how much of your past energy was spent reacting instead of choosing. During this period, your reactions slow down. Your emotional reflexes soften. You no longer flinch at every shift in tone or movement in energy. Your intuition grows louder because it is no longer competing with noise, urgency, or emotional clutter. Clarity replaces confusion. You begin to notice patterns before they fully form. You sense misalignment before it becomes harm. What once surprised you now feels predictable. This is why the divine isolates chosen ones temporarily, not as punishment, not as abandonment, but as refinement. Isolation removes interference. It strips away false signals so your internal compass can recalibrate itself accurately. In this space, your body relearns regulation. Your mind relearns discernment. When the next phase begins, you will not be guessing anymore. You will not need to analyze or explain what feels right. You will recognize what belongs immediately because your body will remain calm, open, and steady in its presence. And you will recognize what does not belong just as quickly because tension will return without warning. The body never lies once it has been trained to feel peace. This is the refinement. The protection phase is not the destination. It is the preparation that ensures you never need to be protected in the same way again. Point 5. Why the world feels quieter and less engaging. You may feel less stimulated, less entertained, and less emotionally charged by what once mattered. And this shift can feel unsettling if you are not prepared for it. This is not depression, not numbness, not the loss of your spark. It is detachment without bitterness. The world did not lose its color. Your nervous system simply stopped needing intensity to feel alive. For a long time, your sense of meaning was forged through friction, through overcoming, enduring, reacting, and surviving. As a chosen one, struggle was once the language through which purpose spoke to you. So when the struggle quiets, the silence can feel like absence. But this neutrality is not emptiness. It is regulation. It is what happens when the inner storms finally settle and the body no longer lives on high alert. Peace has its own texture, and it is easy to miss if you are accustomed to fireworks. It is subtle, steady, and almost invisible to those addicted to emotional spikes. It does not beg for attention. It does not announce itself. It simply holds. This quieter world is evidence that your internal environment is stabilizing. The contradictions inside you are resolving. The constant push and pull is easing. And when inner conflict dissolves, external chaos becomes unnecessary. That is why drama no longer excites you, why gossip feels heavy and pointless, why conversations built on performance, validation, or comparison drain you instead of energizing you. Your system is no longer designed for noise. Forced interactions feel intolerable, not because you are antisocial, but because your spirit now values coherence over connection at any cost. You are no longer feeding on stimulation. You are conserving energy for accuracy, for clarity, for discernment. This phase is where precision replaces passion and presence replaces urgency. You begin to move slower, speak less, and observe more. You choose depth over excitement and truth over intensity. What once thrilled you now feels loud, rushed, and unrefined. And that is not a loss. It is an upgrade. You are not becoming colder. You are becoming cleaner internally, less reactive, less entangled, more exact. This is the calm that comes after integration. When nothing needs to be proven, chased, or resisted, the world feels quieter because you are no longer at war with yourself. And for the first time, your energy is finally yours to direct, not expend. Point 6. What happens if you attempt to re-enter old patterns? There is a warning here, and it must be delivered without fear or softness, because clarity is the highest form of care. If you attempt to return to spaces you were extracted from, the protection does not follow you. Not because you are being punished, not because you failed, but because alignment cannot coexist with denial. Distance was never about abandonment. It was about recalibration. You were removed so your nervous system could relearn safety, so your perception could sharpen without interference, and so your spirit could stabilize without constantly bracing for impact. The protection phase ends when you no longer need distance to remain clear, when your inner structure becomes stronger than external noise. But if you regress emotionally, the lessons will repeat. Not as revenge, not as cruelty, but as precision. If you seek familiarity over truth, the body will speak first. Your nervous system will signal discomfort again, not to punish you, but to remind you that you already outgrew what you are trying to revisit. This is not cruelty. It is consistency. The same way gravity doesn't negotiate, alignment doesn't bargain. The divine doesn't drag anyone forward. It responds to readiness. When you were confused, protection looked like removal. Now that you are aware, protection looks like a choice. You're no longer being shielded from what you can already discern. You're being trusted with awareness now, and awareness comes with responsibility. Responsibility to pause when something feels off, even if it looks familiar. Responsibility to honor the clarity you prayed for, even when it costs you access to old patterns, old dynamics, and old versions of yourself. You are not being tested the way you were before. You are being observed in how you apply what you already know. This is the shift from guidance to stewardship, from rescue to self-command. The path ahead is quieter because it requires less correction. But make no mistake, the signals will still come. Subtle, immediate, precise. And if you listen the first time, You will not need the lesson to repeat itself. Point 7. What this phase is preparing you for. This phase is preparing you for clean expansion, not louder success, not dramatic elevation, but sustainable growth without collapse. The kind of growth that does not require you to fracture yourself just to be seen. What is unfolding now is refinement, the quiet strengthening of internal structures, so that what comes next can be held without strain. The next connections that enter your life will not demand self-betrayal or performance. They will recognize you without needing you to shrink or exaggerate. The next opportunities will not require emotional debt, overextension, or silent suffering as the price of access. They will meet you where your nervous system remains steady, where your integrity stays intact. The next chapter will feel calm, even while it stretches you. And that calm will be unfamiliar at first because you were once conditioned to believe that pressure, urgency, and chaos were signs of destiny. Now you are learning otherwise. You will notice fewer negative situations, not because the world suddenly improved, but because your internal filter became precise. You saw earlier, you sense it sooner. You exit situations before they entangle. You no longer wait for proof through pain. You recognize warning signs without needing them to escalate. You stop negotiating with red flags. You no longer confuse intensity with purpose or adrenaline with alignment. This is the quiet power of a chosen one who has learned to listen inwardly instead of scanning outward for validation. Your discernment has sharpened, and with it, your life simplifies. You are not cutting people off in anger. You are releasing what no longer resonates without drama or explanation. You are not isolating. You are conserving energy for what is worthy of it. You are not alone. You are unburdened. You are not hidden. You are being stabilized. You are protected, not as punishment but as preparation, until you no longer require protection because you have become self-anchored. When that moment arrives, expansion will not feel like a leap, but like a natural widening of space around you. And that is when the next phase begins, not with noise, but with unmistakable clarity.